Hello, this is Dave Sugarbaker, and today is the 7th day of September 2025, and I have a sermon. It's entitled The White Hats. Start out with a part of Psalm 139. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from far away. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. Where can I go from your spirit, or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me, and know my thoughts. See if there is any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. So I have a little quiz, a pop quiz, for you to begin with. What color was Gene Autry's hat? The answer was it was white. What color was Roy Rogers' hat? It was white. What color was the Lone Ranger's hat? It was white. And finally, what color was Hopalong Cassidy's hat? It was black. Now, I actually looked up which of our cowboy heroes wore a white hat. It's part of cowboy movie culture that the hero wears a white hat. I don't know what Hopalong Cassidy was going for by breaking with the tradition. He had a black hat and a black outfit. But in all the cowboy movies, you look for the one in the white hat, and he was going to be the one that would save the day. In Syria, there was a group known as the White Helmets, also known as the Syrian Civil Defense Group, and they were a voluntary organization that emerged during the Syrian Civil War beginning in 2014. They operated primarily in opposition-controlled areas and became internationally recognized for their life-saving work amid the chaos of war. They were the ones who rushed into bombed-out buildings to pull survivors from the rubble. They provided emergency medical aid and transported the injured. And finally, when local infrastructure had collapsed, they were the ones who would come to put out fires and to clear unexploded bombs. Between 2014 and 2018, they claimed to have saved over 114,000 lives, but the work came at a pretty major cost. Over 200 volunteers in the white helmets were killed in the line of duty. In the darkest days of the war, people looked for the white helmets who were ready to help out. Fred Rogers said, "When I was a boy, and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would tell me, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping." So Mr. Rogers repeated this message many times throughout his career, especially during moments of national tragedy, and it became a kind of an emotional anchor for generations of children and adults alike. A gentle reminder that even in the darkest times, compassionate and courageous people are also there. They might not be wearing white hats, but they are the heroes nonetheless. After watching the evening news the other night, I was reflecting on the war in Gaza. It's an especially depressing war, I thought to myself, because there are no white hats. Except maybe those who are trying to get food to the starving civilians. We usually choose up sides when we hear of wars and conflicts around the globe, If we don't choose who to root for, our politicians will help us decide. But in the case of the Gaza war, I can't find anybody wearing white hats. It feels like a choice between, on the one hand, terrorism, and on the other hand, genocide. And that's no choice at all. As I think about it, the biblical writers were clear-eyed and unflinching when they described the heroes of the Old and the New Testament. There are amazing, outstanding, but very human beings throughout. David, Elijah, Paul, Peter, and others as well. All of the white hats in the Bible were human beings who had their shining moments, but they also were flawed and imperfect people. The Bible doesn't paint them with a kind of a soft focus, rosy glow. They have their white hat moments, but they are profoundly human. Jesus, being fully God and fully human, according to the Creed, is a different issue. He was the white hat of all white hats, but he's both perfect and human. So he's both perfect and imperfect. And that seemed to be a contradiction in terms. We'll have to tackle that issue some other day. David in the Old Testament was an extraordinary leader and unifier of the 12 tribes of Israel. He had unmatched political instincts, and besides that, he was a poet. But he also engineered the murder of the husband of a woman he wanted to possess. David was one of the heroes of the Old Testament, and centuries later it was important for Jesus to be born of David's lineage. But David had flaws. The biblical writers are clear-eyed in their portrayal of David. He was a white hat, a hero of Jewish history, but he was very human. Elijah was an outstanding prophet, defending Israel's monotheistic religion against the prophets of Baal and others. But when the king's wife, Jezebel, puts out a contract on him, Elijah leaves the territory. He really leaves. He goes to another country, out into the wilderness of that country, and he hides out in a mountain cave in the wilderness. And it's there that the voice of God speaks to him, not out of the earthquake, wind, or fire, but a still, small voice. It's an amazing story, and we use the language of this story to describe God's voice as it may speak to us, a still, small voice. But we pay less attention to what God said to Elijah. Running for his life, Elijah finally encounters God, and God says, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Being my prophet implies that there are other people to whom you speak, like the king, or other people who may be religiously confused. Out here in the middle of nowhere, you're not doing much prophetic work. Go back home. Sure, people are trying to kill you, but you have my message to proclaim. By the way, you lost your white hat when you snuck out of town. Paul was a contemporary of the disciples, but he never really met them before he set out to kill them. After Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, when the new Jewish Reformed movement came along, it was called the Way, and as it emerged, Saul did his murderous best to stamp it out. He was a Pharisee, and he had convinced himself that Jesus' followers were heretics, and heresy was a capital offense. He was building quite a reputation as a persecutor of the earliest Christians when he had a turnaround on the road to Damascus. At first, the Christians didn't trust him to be on their side. It was just too scary. But it took a while for him to earn his white hat. Simon Peter became the leader of the church, but he had a really rocky start. Jesus referred to him as Rock or Peter or Petros because he correctly understood that Jesus was the Messiah. But Jesus also calls him Satan when Simon Peter tried to prevent him from going to Jerusalem. He professes allegiance to Jesus at the Last Supper, but then again, he denies knowing him hours later. Peter's white hat was seriously smudged before he takes his role as the leader of the emerging church. The good news of the gospel is that God can use flawed human beings as his white hats. Perfection is not a human capability. Nevertheless, God can use our empathy, our sense of justice, our impulse to include, to reconcile, and to heal. God's not waiting for us to get perfect. When Jesus says, "Be perfect even as your spiritual parent is perfect," it's a mistranslation. It should say, "Be mature, complete, unswayed, and even-handed in your love and mercy, just like your spiritual parent." We perfectionists had better take note. We can stop trying to catch and correct our faults before anybody else discovers them and says, "Dave, you screwed up." That's the worst for me, I know, as a perfectionist. But it's impossible. In the end, we will be human, and by definition, human means not perfect. We are flawed, quirky, and sort of good most of the time. But God's not looking for perfect people to be his white hat heroes. God uses flawed human beings who are able to say, "Not my will, but your will be done." Now, God bless you. If you find value in this, I'd appreciate it if you'd pass it along. But stay safe, and I'll see you soon.